Thanks for having me. My name is Bronwyn Dobchuk-Land. I'm Assistant Professor of Criminal Justice at the University of Winnipeg. I'm also a resident of the West End, and I'm speaking today as someone who has researched community-based responses to crime and violence, policing, community policing, in Winnipeg specifically for the last 10 years. Some of what I have to say today has been said before to the Executive Policy Committee during budget hearings, to the Standing Policy Committee on Protection, Community Services and Parks. But I think much of it bears repeating because it's clearly not being heard. I'm very concerned that the Winnipeg Police Board is not adequately fulfilling its mandate, and I think that the proposed budget reflects an inability to represent the diverse publics that the previous delegation actually mentioned have overwhelmingly this past year spoken out against the prioritizing of funding for police as responses to public safety rather than other life-sustaining services. For example, if the chair of the police board believes that the actions of the police against citizens of Winnipeg, like Aisha Hudson, Stuart Andrews, Jason Collins, are not relevant as part of a budget discussion, that is extremely, extremely concerning for the supposed role that the police board is supposed to play in representing the interests of diverse publics in conversations about the distribution of public resources. So I just want to say I was really disturbed by the suggestion that that shouldn't be part of the budget conversation, because we're talking here about increasing the police budget once more, which we know is directly related to decreasing the budgets for other community services that actually are evidence-based responses to safety and security. So the role of the board to ensure that community needs, values, expectations are reflected in the strategic plan and the budget. I don't see that this has been achieved. The Winnipeg Police Service budget keeps increasing every year, despite ample evidence that increases in policing do not lead to decreases in crime. There's a criminological consensus on this. You can read it in my very mainstream Introduction to Criminal Justice textbook. There are, however, evidence-based ways of increasing safety in our communities, and it is in the public interest, which the board is supposed to represent, for the city to begin to divest from policing and invest in community services that increase safety. The Winnipeg Police Board, acting in the public interest, should be a mechanism for suggesting how this can be done, but you're reporting on your own activities, the strategic plans you've produced. The budget itself suggests that you're more interested in justifying police spending, taking police demands at face value, rather than providing a vitally important check and balance in this current political moment where it is probably more possible than it has been in decades for public officials to actually call into question the role of police and their continued public funding. Instead of treating increases in the police budget as a result of a set of political decisions, the board appears to continue to treat them as inevitable, and that's really worrisome. In reporting on the public consultations, the police board doesn't seem to reflect many of the criticisms that have been circulated among various publics about the increasing dominance of police responses to what are social problems, not crime problems. Where is the evidence that increases in policing are helping the city's most serious problems? Where are the expert opinions outside of the police being represented on the police board? Where are the critical perspectives? What is an oversight body if it doesn't intend to question or curtail the police version of public safety or police power itself? I just don't understand how the board is supposed to be a check and balance for police governance if there's so little variation in the orientations, interests, and constituencies of its members. And I am talking about the budget here. I'm talking about priorities as expressed through decisions about where to put money. If the police board is not actively seeking out the airing of grievances or taking debate on these important issues seriously, how can it be said to be fulfilling its mandate to the public? 115,000 people signed a petition to defund the Winnipeg Police Service. Where does that register on your radar as the police board? What is your response? This is a critical juncture in history, as I mentioned, where the police board, city council, EPC has the power and the opportunity to choose whether or not to entrench this path that we've been on, of increasing the police budget and decreasing community services that has led to the crises that are unfolding around us, or to change course. There's been a popularization of public dissatisfaction with the police. People who were previously kept silent about their negative experiences with the police are being empowered to speak out. There's more of a willingness to admit that the police are a seriously flawed response to the range of social problems that we put them in charge of responding to. And we have the experience now in the city of Winnipeg that decades of investing in the police and increasing the police budget has not made an ounce of difference in the very real crises of safety and security that Winnipeg's most vulnerable residents are facing. Many of the levers of racialized victimization, racialized imprisonment, are at the city level and actually come down to decisions about whether or not to fund the police or community services. We know that the more that we respond to social suffering and crises in our communities with policing instead of social supports, the more we will fill our jails with young Indigenous and Black people, especially women. The fastest growing jail population in Manitoba is Indigenous women. How does this happen? Well, it happens by divesting from community services and investing in police, which helps to make sure that people who need help or a safe place will have few other places to turn to but the police, and that they will be met with suspicion instead of support, with surveillance instead of safe space, with control instead of care. We do not need the amount of police power we have. We need drastically less. Half of the police time and resources are dedicated to responding to calls. That's 55% of police time, and only 10% of those events that the police respond to are classified as urgent. The most common call police respond to is domestic disturbance. The second most common is well-being checks. You know who can do proactive well-being checks really well? Frontline social services that have close and caring relationships with the people they serve. They have the flexibility, capacity, and autonomy to listen and respond to the needs articulated by the people they're serving. Often the people they're serving are the same people who police consider risky and threatening. I know from my work in community level responses to crime and community policing that the same people who are most vulnerable to violence are the people who are most likely to be criminalized by the police when they call for help, and so they don't call for help. So lessons from, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls report. We know the most effective solutions to domestic and gender-based violence, for example, are empowering people vulnerable to violence with the resources and range of options to manage their own situations. And by continuing to increase the police budget and not taking seriously the educated, informed, evidence and experience-based call to significantly defund the police, you are quite literally doing the opposite of what national large-scale commissions and inquiries have said is the direction that we need to go in order to produce a culture of safety for all. So it's unconscionable. These political decisions will cause people to die, and I'd like to continue to foreground the fact that budgetary decisions absolutely are about life and death at their very core, and people who are most vulnerable to violence and criminalization and working on the front lines of these public safety issues know that budgetary decisions are about life and death. If you continue to increase the police budget, to not take seriously public dissatisfaction and the significant amount of community organizing that has gone into airing that dissatisfaction, I think you are finding yourselves on the wrong side of history. You have an opportunity here as members of the police board to register dissent. If you don't, your name is going down on the record for voting for another budget that ensures that we stay on the same path.
Could you just hang on a second? You just run out of time. I'm just going to see. There's
I'm actually finished.
Extension.
It's fine.
Okay. Well, just your final thoughts then, please.
My final thoughts were just to remind you all on the police board that you have an opportunity to register dissent here. You are supposed to be providing a space for diverse publics to have their voices heard, and that really hasn't registered in this budget or in the work of the police board. So I really just want to call on everybody in that room to think really hard about you know, how your vote on this budget and future budgets reflects this moment in history.
Thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions? Councillor Mays?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I think we start needing a new disclaimer here. Some of my colleagues have been asking questions in budget presentations recently and then been told they're bullying. So I ask questions not to bully you or intimidate you. This is part of a democratic process. You are allowed to speak. I'm allowed to ask questions. You're allowed to respond. It's democracy.
I'm not easily bullied or intimidated.
Very good. Thank you. You used I think you said 10% of calls were urgent. Did I mishear that? Can you just clarify what? Because, I mean, I'm not trying to entrap you here. I mean, our own published data in volume 1 of the budget says 231,000 dispatched calls a year, 108,000 of those are emergency or urgent. So
emergency or urgent. Yeah. So there's a distinction between those categories in reporting. And the reason that I sectioned off urgent from emergency is because I think that in the public's imagination, most of the work that police are doing is responding to absolutely urgent situations rather than emergencies that other emergency services could respond to. And I think it's really important to dispel that public perception and to highlight the fact that the vast majority of police work is actually not in responding to high-level emergencies.
okay, but you'd use 10%, and our data would indicate 108,000 out of 231,000 is higher than 10%.
Yeah, that's my stat is from. Yeah, so that's combined emergency and urgent. If you just separate out the urgent ones from the 2019 police report, you get 10%.
Okay, and that you're saying that's okay. That's not in the budget though. You're saying that's in a separate police board report?
Yeah, exactly. Annual report.
Thank you. You had mentioned earlier in your comments about social service agencies or social workers being able to form more nurturing type relationships. Mm-hmm. Are you assuming then that you feel that the police service is not capable of forming those types of relationships in the discharge of their duties?
Yeah, precisely, because the tools that they have at their disposal and their mandate is to consider law breaking at the forefront of their evaluation of a situation. So we hear lots of situations where, for example, a woman calls in because she's afraid of her partner. And when the police come, they run her name and his name, find that she has conditions that she's violated or outstanding warrants. And instead of responding to the call in that she has put forward, the police often see it as their duty to respond to the law breaking that they see present. Police are not equipped to solve problems in ways that are creative or sensitive. And we see that time and time again in the ways that they actually put people in danger who are calling for their help.
Don't you find the characteristics that you just described are inherently human as opposed to ascribed to an occupation?
Absolutely not, because we are able to observe that people working in all sorts of frontline social services who don't see their role as enforcing the law are able to notice the fact that the people who are most vulnerable to victimization are often people who are also sometimes involved in lawbreaking or violence themselves, and are able to see that what they need is help, not punishment, when in fact the role of police and the tools they are given, and the training that they receive is completely structured around punishment. I think it's definitely not a human response to look at somebody who's in trouble and say, well, I know you're in trouble, but I think actually you're the problem. That's not a human response. That has to be trained into you. And that's how police are trained.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, Councillor Meigs, go ahead.
You talked about listening to diverse publics. I don't know if you've had a chance to go through the 2019 citizen survey, but I mean, one of the observations in that survey was 25% of respondents under 35 thought the service was underfunded, and 53% of those over 55, more than half of those over 55 thought the service was underfunded. So I appreciate what you're saying, and certainly we hear from both sides here, I guess. I just want to reassure you, we hear people who call for reduced funding. We also hear from people who are calling for increased funding, and the survey suggests different age groups might see that differently. So, I mean, I don't think well, I guess my question is, you're aware of those survey results that
of course, yeah. I'm aware of the fact that some people would prefer that the police service continue to be funded. Sorry.
Well, a significant chunk of the public thinks it's underfunded, and you've
Well,
articulated a significant chunk of the public think it's overfunded. There is diversity of opinion.
yeah, exactly. And we see that the people who think it's underfunded are the people whose voices are reflected in the budget, despite the fact that scholarly research-based evidence is on the side of the people who think that the police are overfunded and should be defunded. So I think that it's, we combine public opinion with evidence-based policymaking. And in the case of public safety, evidence-based policymaking does not side with increasing police budgets. And you can, I'm not in a radical camp of criminologists in saying that, truly.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you for